Hello, welcome everyone to the Future of Farming webinar hosted by the Vermont Community Foundation's Insight Hub, an information series that provides you with ideas to inform your giving. Today, we will talk about strategies to strengthen agriculture in our state, revitalize the vital role it plays, or recognizing the vital role it plays in supporting the Vermont economy, especially our rural economy, along with tourism, recreation, and Vermont's overall quality of life. I'm Kate Neubauer, Program Officer for the Community Environment here at the Foundation, and I'll be the moderator for today's conversation. Our guest today is Anson Tebbetts, Secretary of the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and Liz Gleason, Program Director of the Vermont Farm and Forest Viability Program at the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Welcome to you both. Before we jump into our conversation, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping items. For attendees, we have enabled the live caption feature, and you should have the ability to turn it on in the lower menu if you would like to see it. There will be opportunities for you to ask questions. We will have a 20-minute audience question and answer towards the end of the session, but we encourage you to submit your questions at any point using the question and answer feature that you should see at the bottom of your Zoom window. The chat feature is turned off, so we can stream all comments and questions to one location. And additionally, if you think of questions after the webinar concludes, feel free to send them to info@vermontcf.org. And of course, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Vermont Community Foundation's website about a week after today's events. So let's jump into the conversation. Anson, one of the state's goals is to help support new and diverse types of farming and food production. The recent Future of Vermont Agriculture Commission report discussed the fact that while dairy farms still generate about 70% of the state's agricultural sales and use more than 80% of Vermont's working lands, the number of dairy farms in Vermont continue to shrink due to low milk prices and other factors. What are some of the most promising approaches to build alternatives and reduce reliance on conventional dairy?
Well, thank you, Kate, and appreciate the opportunity. And we thank the Vermont Community Foundation and also our partner, Liz, at the Housing and Conservation Board. We're delighted that we're having this forum to talk about agriculture. It's always a wonderful day when we're talking about how our food is grown in our great state of Vermont. A couple of things. It's important to recognize that dairy is still vital to the state of Vermont's economy, its agriculture economy, its overall economy. And then we need to protect that and do all we can to make sure that those farms can be successful that are out there. There are other things that we are doing. Of course, we want to give our farm community options and choices. When we run out of options and choices, it becomes very difficult. Most of it, and probably 99.9% of our farmers are farm families. They have their, their family working around them, and so forth. So we need to also work on giving them choices. Now, if we take dairy, for example, we are really fortunate to have something called the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center that is located in Vermont. It is funded by USDA, but it's giving dairy processors, dairy farmers, those working in dairy, more options, looking at different practices. For example, maybe they want to sell directly to a cheese maker or cheese operation. So that's an option. Maybe they want to convert to grass-fed dairy. So that's an option for them. So we continue to look at different models for folks. We have a number of folks that are looking at agritourism now to supplement their income. Recently went to a burger night in East Montpelier. It was a maple operation in the late winter and early spring. But in the summertime, they open up their farm and they have a beef operation, and they cook the burgers there and serve them to their about 250 people. So there's a lot of options and different options for folks to look at. We just need to be supportive of them, give them the information that's best for them. And that's where Liz comes in. Liz works very closely with dairy farmers, people that maybe got a strawberry patch, maybe they're doing berries, maybe they're doing agritourism. But she's giving them some vital information about business planning. So options, choices, and giving them the information so those families can make those decisions for them.
Thanks, Anson. Liz, what are your thoughts about the question?
Thanks. Maybe I'll just take 1 second to introduce myself and say a little bit more about what we do. So I work for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. I run a program called the Vermont Farm and Forest Viability Program. And like Anson said, we do business advising with farmers. We work really closely with farm families over multiple years to help them potentially look at different options, diversify, grow their business, in some cases transfer their business to new ownership or access land, a lot of different kinds of support. And we're housed within the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. So part of an organization that has a really holistic mission around rural community development, from affordable housing to land conservation. So with that hat on, I guess I do want to really agree with what Anson said about dairy continuing to be an important part of the state's economy. I think we have to both recognize that Americans consume a lot of dairy products and that Vermont is actually a really great place to grow those products. We have strong environmental regulations, we have great grass, we have great supportive organizations and systems. So I see dairy continuing to be a part of the landscape. That being said, diversification as a state is important. We're one of the most heavily concentrated agricultural systems in the country in terms of the percentage allocated to one product, which is dairy. So there's a lot of exciting work going on around diversification. Our program does a lot to help people either look at new products to get into, whether they're dairy farms that have decided that that's not in their future anymore and want to do something else. We work with about half dairy farms, half everybody else, from maple to veggie to flowers to vineyards. There's just a lot of amazing work. And I think that the state really needs to take a multi-pronged approach to supporting that. We need to support the innovative farmers who are doing this work on the ground. We need to support the programming that helps lift them up and gives them access to land and business coaching and education. And we need that policy prong for looking at policies that support diversification and support a strong backbone of dairy.
Thanks, Liz. A follow-up question. You mentioned that you work with farmers who may want to switch operations, and that would include switching out infrastructure or buying new infrastructure. So for example, if a traditional dairy farmer or dairy operation wants to switch to a goat farm or a grass-fed beef operation, could you tell us about some of the successes and challenges around converting farm infrastructure?
Definitely, yeah. Well, besides purchasing a farm, infrastructure, if you're making a major change, is definitely the second most expensive, or sometimes much more expensive than purchasing the farm itself. So it's a really big deal. And as we see a slow shift in types of farming, we see more and more farms that need to make pretty major investments in their infrastructure. I would say that Vermont is a really amazing place to be a farmer. We do have a lot of supportive programs and policies that make it easier and more effective to farm here than other places, but there's still a lot of challenges. We have a lot of grant and loan programs that folks can access to help with infrastructure. We also have many grant and loan programs that won't pay for infrastructure, but want to fund other kinds of things. So I guess my lessons learned, having both done the business planning side of this, and we also make grants directly to farmers, is that I think grants continue to play a really important role in catalyzing major infrastructure investments. Generally, farming is a low margin business. That doesn't mean it's not one of the most important types of businesses around. Like, farms grow our food, and just because we're in an economic system where prices continue to get depressed and input costs continue to rise, like, folks will continue to have marginal profitability, and infrastructure investments will continue to be hard. So I think we'll touch on this later too, but that's one thing that philanthropy can really help contribute to. So grants are an important part of the picture. Having access to business assistance, coaching, a supportive network of peers, any sort of outside help to help move a project along can be really important. And then the financing landscape, I see a really big difference between super friendly, like 0 interest loans to 3% to 5%. Like the cost of that financing really changes with just a couple interest percentage points. So for folks who are involved in the sort of mission-based financing world, I think keeping rates as low as possible and combining them with business coaching and grants is a really solid way to help make those changes. And I guess I'll just say in general that that making some of these major changes, like from cow dairies to goat dairies, like it's going to look different on every farm. There's not one miracle answer. Goat dairy isn't a miracle answer to cow dairy. It really depends on the business owner's skills, like interests, what infrastructure is currently there, what debt load they already have. So I love when we collectively as a state want to get behind new kinds of agriculture, like goat dairies or wineries. These aren't new, but they're gaining in prevalence. I think it's really exciting and impactful to invest in emerging areas and should be talked about, but we have to be careful that we're not raising things up as sort of a cure-all.
Thanks, Liz. Anson, do you have ideas around the question?
Yeah, and I think we always need to keep in mind is, Liz sort of touched upon a little bit. Every family farm is different. There's a different dynamic within the family. Most importantly, probably is what the land looks like. You can go to Orange County and then you can just travel 50 minutes away to Addison County and the land is much, much different. So it's a different form of farming. So 14 counties, the land is differently. There's different consumers that are around you. And speaking to infrastructure, though, one example I think that is an experiment that so far is going well, and the foundation community played a vital role in that. We had a significant dairy in Lamoille County that decided it was not in their future to milk 300 cows anymore, but they still wanted to be in farming. So they got together and they wanted to convert to a goat dairy. It fit their family structure. So they got together with Vermont Creamery based in Barrytown, Websterville, award-winning, significant dairy. They need more goat's milk. They recently won 8 major awards out in Oregon for their cheese and their butter. So this family took the plunge. We were able to help with infrastructure. The big change going from cow to goats is how the goats are milked, the udders differently. So they had to get in a whole new milking system for this operation. So with foundation help, with a program, a granting program with the Working Lands Enterprise Fund that's managed here at the Agency of Agriculture, we were able to make it more affordable to transition to that new system. So that's a way that foundations can really help, is with those significant investments in infrastructure. They're only a couple of years into this operation. They seem happy. They seem to be doing well, and they're kind of a test case. Vermont Creamery will tell you, I need more goat's milk, and they want it to come from Vermont. So I think we probably could get 5 or 6 more of those up and running, and it may help dairy, but it also may help that farm family stay in something that they want to do and they love.
That's great news. Anson, many of the Vermont farmers are nearing retirement age. Could you tell us some of the current strategies to help younger farmers, BIPOC farmers, and others get into farming?
That's, if you talk with the farm community, I think it's at the top of their list. I don't know the exact age of the farming community now, but I'm sure it's north of 55 years old. But saying that, there is incredible, I think, energy with people who may have never been involved in farming that want to play a role in that. Vermont is a good place to get started, but the cost of land is expensive. in Vermont. We've seen that over the last couple of years through this pandemic. We've seen real estate get really expensive. So I think they need help with good financing with that, and they also need a technical assistance. And Liz's group, they can set you up the do's and don'ts in the planning. One need that we are hearing more about is getting better tax preparation, setting up your farm in a way that's in a responsible way, so you can be more affordable and have a bright future with that. So that's one area. But I think the opportunity is there if we somehow can capture making land more affordable for folks, and also some networking and maybe getting some young people on, some farmers that are looking for a transition. Maybe they could spend a year or two on the farm, work out a system where they can transition over time, so that maybe they can take over the farm ownership. So there are opportunities there.
Great, thank you. Liz, do you have thoughts?
Sure, yeah. Why don't I start a little bit with the part of the question around supporting BIPOC farmers, and then I'll move back to talking about land access more generally. I would say there's a lot of amazing organizations in Vermont that are specifically supporting and collaborating with BIPOC farmers. There's Migrant Justice, Milk with Dignity. There's the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. There's the Vermont Relief Collective. So those types of organizations that are really working closely with and led by people of color, I think are really, really important to invest in. And I'm sure there's others that I'm not naming right now. There was a bill passed in the legislature this winter that created I believe it's called the Land Access and Opportunity Board. That process is being led by Susanna Davis. And that's going to bring together a really wide group of stakeholders who are going to have time and a small budget to be able to start digging further into the issue of land access for BIPOC farmers and other marginalized communities. And thank you, Lily, the Susu Community Farm also, she just put in the chat. Those organizations all have slightly different missions and approaches, but I think one thing I feel like they have in common is working with a really wide variety of farmers, from folks who are aspiring farmers to people working on farms to people who already have farms. All of those people are a really important part of our food system and landscape. And I think when we talk about farmers, sometimes we mean farm owners, but really farm workers and farm employees are farmers too. And organizations that are sort of elevating the importance of the workforce and folks that are working on farms are really doing super important work. So in terms of land access more generally and farmers reaching retirement age, it's such a major trend in what I see on the ground. I started my job here at the Farm Viability Program 11 or 12 years ago, something like that. And I've sort of slowly seen the number of farm transfer plans, exit strategy type work grow. And I think that's really indicative of that kind of age bracket and moment we're in. I see it as sort of a two-part equation. One is working with the folks who are winding down, and the other is working with folks who are trying to get onto land. And like Anson has said, Vermont is a really wonderful place to farm. It's pretty common that I hear that our program is supporting a farm of farmers who have recently moved to Vermont from somewhere else because they specifically wanted to be farming in Vermont. And that's really powerful, and I think speaks to our support system. Financing, like Anson mentioned, is really the big one here. I guess instead of talking about big trends, I want to share a couple of really cool things that are going on right now and ways I've seen Vermont be a real leader around land access, particularly in the conservation world. Vermont, with others, many years ago, developed a really neat mechanism called the option to purchase at agricultural value, which is part of a conservation easement, and it's a long name. We'll call it the OPAV. It's a complicated legal mechanism, but it's projects like those and the leadership of land trusts and VHCB and farmers and developing these mechanisms that are trying to like turn the tide a little bit on how do we make farmland affordable for farmers. That tool specifically adds a clause to a conservation easement that the farm needs to be able to be purchased at agricultural value in the future. And that's an amazing tool. Conservation easements in general are an amazing tool for keeping land affordable, but they don't always meet that affordability. So the Vermont Land Trust right now is engaging in a project to try to identify additional tools around perpetual affordability, trying to draw lessons from the affordable housing world. And one other project that's not specifically around land access, but it came up in the comments a little bit, and I think it's related, is the question of affordable housing, both for farm owners and farm workers. And more with all these folks retiring but wanting to stay on their farms, we're seeing housing is actually a real barrier to successful transitions, and is a real barrier to having folks want to work on your farm and feel like they have dignified housing. So I do agree that we need more investment in that area, and the HCB has been able to put together a pilot program around investing in some more affordable housing on farms. We need more of that for farm workers. We need more of it for new farm owners. It's going to be a lift.
Anson, have you seen the same trend?
Yeah, and I think what Liz was talking about is it was a significant development when we decided to invest in more farm housing, and also that's on the farm and for farm workers. And there's some work being done on that. And I think more is going to happen with that. The other part, we're hearing some of our significant dairy operations are struggling for labor. And one reason that they are talking about that is they can't find housing that's close enough to the farm or close enough to the factory or where they're processing the milk, for example. So those are big issues, and we have some that are thinking about some processing facilities are thinking about, do I need to build my own housing for the workers so they're not commuting as long. One thing about agriculture, a lot of us through this pandemic have been able to work remotely, but agriculture, you can't. It doesn't work remotely. So, they got to process it, they got to pack it, they got to ship it, they got to clean it. All those things are involved. So, we need more housing, and I know at the highest levels in state government we're working on that, and some of that will come, but it's going to take some time. But the money is, thankfully, we've got some resources now to invest in some of this important housing that is just vital to everywhere around Vermont.
Thanks. It was mentioned briefly before, but I was wondering if each of you could talk about how philanthropic giving could help strengthen agriculture in Vermont. Anson, if you want to go first.
Sure. Well, it's vital, and I appreciate there's been a lot done in the past, and we are so appreciative to fill in those gaps, because some of the granting programs that we have and some of the financing that we have, they don't qualify for that. So when foundations can step in and help, it's vital. For example, in a slaughterhouse, for example, the equipment can be rather pricey for some of that, but when a foundation can step in and help with that, it's really, really important. It makes it more viable. And it not only helps that business, but it helps along the way. So if we can get more animals processed, whether it be beef or pork or chicken or lamb, it helps the farmer, because if they can get more animals processed, it helps keep that farmer in business. And there's a great need for that. A great example that's happening now is what's happening in Charlotte, the former Nordic farm. They are looking at various new enterprises and options there at Earth Common and what they're doing there. That is an important model that's just getting off the ground. But they're going to need some infrastructure needs there that may be able to be duplicated across Vermont. For example, they're looking at maybe growing more grains. We have a tremendous number of great people that make bread in Vermont, but could we source more of that, wheat or rye here and turn that into something? So the foundation could step in and help with the processing. Processing is one of the biggest obstacles to getting more local products out into the field, and also distribution and that infrastructure that goes along with that distribution. So those are sometimes those are big ticket items that we can't always can do, but when the private world steps in and helps in a way that builds our food system, it's really important.
Liz?
Yeah, I really agree with Anson on that in terms of like those more innovative or emerging markets that might not have either the research and development that they quite need to grow or funding for infrastructure. I think that's a really important role, and we've seen a lot of philanthropic organizations in Vermont really play a super important role there over time. I guess I want to talk about sort of 3 other bucket areas where I feel like philanthropy is really important. The first one being on that sort of individual person level. I think as a human who engages in the world around you, like seeking out those businesses and people who are doing what you want agriculture to look like and buying from them, really like making that a priority, putting your dollars there as a person, and urging your organization to apply that across your purchasing. I think the second area is around like structure of giving, and they're looking at how you make grants or loans and talking to the people who have applied for those over the years and learning, like, does this system that we have work for you? Like, are these easy to get? Are they hard to get? Are they easy to manage? Are they hard to manage? How can philanthropy move more and more towards a place of multi-year operating grants? I have a lot of colleagues who spend so much time grant writing who could be spending that time directly working with farmers. And similarly, like farmers who find it really challenging to access grants, who could be spending their time farming. How can grant makers, including myself, make our processes as easy as possible? I think like we can't sort of rest on our laurels and always say, well, we've done it this way. Like we have to always be thinking about who are the users and how to make this as easy as possible for them, because they have a lot of hard work to make the worlds that we want to see on the ground. And then the third bucket, I feel like, is this really big structural idea of like, not to be like a downer with the last question here, but I feel like we are really in a time of crisis. Like we're in the crisis of how do we build the most sustainable food system possible, the climate emergency, affordable housing crisis, like growing income inequality. These are major issues, and they're not going to get better. They're going to get worse if we don't put our efforts towards them. So I think they all require like really massive investments as soon as possible.
Thanks, Liz. I agree with
my soapbox.
This has been a great discussion so far. So let's open things up for questions from the folks who's been following along. The first one is for Anson. Some farmers say regulations are too burdensome. Meanwhile, we know that farm runoff is a major environmental problem, and so are pesticides. How can the state navigate these twin challenges to support a stronger ag sector and a healthy environment in the future?
Yeah. Part of farming that is in their bucket list now. Vermont does have some of the most stringent environmental laws in the nation. We've embraced that. It does come with a cost to the farmer. The farmers have invested, considerable, hundreds of dollars each day they're investing on making sure that they're protecting the environment. The state has made, big investments in helping with some of that infrastructure, making sure that, for example, manure doesn't get to the waterways, and that we've built significant containments and manure storage for that. And I think the farm community over the last 3 or 4 years, since the new environmental laws went into effect, have really stepped up and done the work. And if you look at some of the data that we're getting from the environmental community and what we're sharing with an Agency of Natural Resources, we are seeing reductions in phosphorus going into Lake Champlain and our waterways. And that's because, farmers are doing the best they can to take care of the land. I would say no farmer wants to hurt its land or the water. Mistakes sometimes happen. And that's when we step in. We are a regulatory body here at the agency. And that's one thing that about 80% of the work that we do at the agency is involved in regulation, whether it's water quality, whether it's weights and measures, whether it's, we're regulating dairy plants to make sure there's food safety. We have animal health. There's a lot of things that are happening, and that's one of our responsibilities that we take seriously here at the agency. And I know the farm community takes it seriously as well. We're making progress. We have to make more progress because that's what Vermonters do. They protect the environment, and they want it to be a better place.
Thanks, Anson. Another one that comes in, I don't know which one of you would answer it, but what percentage of the food eaten in Vermont is produced in Vermont? Anybody want to take a chance on that one?
Liz, do you want to?
I'm not sure I know it off the top of my head, but the Farm to Plate organization has done really extensive research on this over time. And I'm just going to throw out a guess. I think what they said, the change from 2010 to 2020, there was an increase. This includes like locally processed things like beer, which may not be Vermont grains, but they're a Vermont food product. Maybe it was like 15 or 20% in 2020. Maybe that's too high. Anyway, you can go to Farm to Plate and find that out. But if I can just take a sec to also weigh in on the last question, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah.
I guess I just wanted to say that I am seeing more division or a possibility of more and increased division between agriculture and environmental interests. And while I completely understand why that's the case, I think personally, I find it very it's challenging and that's sometimes counterproductive. And I would encourage all of us who have the opportunity to donate or be thought partners or just think about this personally to recognize we're all in this together. There's not a difference between the environment and farms. There's not a difference between us and Lake Champlain. We're all contributing to water quality in Lake Champlain and our waterways. It's not just farmers. So how can we hold the tensions of we need food, and sometimes the way we produce food has consequences that we don't like those two things exist. How can we work on those and continue to be in on things together? Because I do, this is getting a little wooey, but I feel like some of our challenges come from this idea that nature has to be preserved as this perfect, immaculate thing, but it's all connected. We live in a working landscape. We want it to be as healthy as possible. Some of that health comes from helping farms be sustainable as possible. Some of it comes from investing in our forests. Some of it comes from protecting biodiversity. It's all connected.
Especially in the face of a changing climate.
Yeah.
I would just a quick follow up on the about local food. Farm to Plate does have a project underway. It's called New England Feeding New England, and I think it's also important to think about our food system as a regional food system. With a population of 660,000 people, we can produce a lot of food, but we can't consume all that food. So we need to export it. And that could be maple, that could be dairy, that could be vegetables. So they have some goals to, by 2030, to have 30% of the food produced and consumed here in New England. So that's a goal that all of us are working on. We've had meetings recently with all the commissioners and secretaries within New England about that goal and trying to work on that. We need to work with some of our bigger supermarkets because a majority of people still purchase their food from major supermarkets. Vermont has some outstanding local retailers that really support our farmers. And we are so appreciative of those local retailers or those co-ops, because sometimes those are the entryway to a number of our food producers. They get their start, they get their product in there. And if they can get it in there, it gets some attention, they can go other places. But still, we need to do more work on getting, more of our local food into some of the major retailers that sometimes are not owned by our neighbors. They may be owned by an international company. So that's one of the goals of this that's being worked with, and we're appreciative of Farm to Plate taking the lead on that and trying to work with all of us to get more food produced. And we found that through the pandemic that the system didn't break down. We saw it. When you're producing, your meat in 5 different plants around the country, and a few of them shut down, and then you're not seeing any pork on the shelves in South Burlington, then we know we've got a problem. So making those investments, and that's where foundations can step in. If we can make more investments in our regional food system of distribution, processing, that will go a long way to making sure that we have abundant local fresh food within our borders.
Yeah. Staying on the topic of food in Vermont, do either one of you have a sense of what percentage of food produced in Vermont is wasted? And are we making any progress on that?
I don't have numbers on that, but we do have gleaning programs in Vermont that, for example, if there are too many apples, they will take them and make sure they get to our food shelves or the Vermont Food Bank. One thing that's important, the Vermont Food Bank does purchase a great deal of local food, and they would like to do more if possible. So that's one avenue of making sure that we are not wasting as much food as possible. Consumers, shoppers can be interesting. You look at an apple and it's got a dent in the apple, and the consumer will buy the one without the dent, thinking it tastes better. Well, they probably taste the same, but just how our mind works. So there's a lot of programs in making sure that we save as much food and get it to those that are in need.
Liz, do you know how we compare to other states on this front?
I'm not sure. If I had to hazard a guess, I would guess that on the consumer end, like once food is purchased, we're probably fairly similar in terms of waste percent. Maybe on the producer end, like before stuff gets to market, we might be stronger given how effective our gleaning programs are. There's statewide organizations like Salvation Farms that organize gleaning. There's a lot of really amazing, more localized efforts. So I don't know the stats, but I know that we do have some really strong gleaning organizations and farmers that feel really committed to working with those organizations.
And if there's a big crop at a farm, I know a number of farms, and if they can't sell it all, they will donate it to various organizations or food shelves to make sure it's not wasted, and et cetera.
Great. Moving on to another question from someone following along. He says, I'm not understanding grants going to farmers who are not 501c3s. Can you please speak to this? I can say, sharing from the VCF perspective, that I know that we support a lot of agriculture projects through our mission investment program, and in investing in the agriculture sector. But do you guys have any advice for farmers who are not 501c3s on how they would go about receiving grants?
Well, there's a lot of state government and nonprofit grant programs where funding can go directly to farmers who are not 501c3s. Many can do that. So it just depends on the type of entity and what they're set up to be able to do. My understanding is that many philanthropic grants are only able to go to 501c3s. But for example, when our program first started running a grant program where we were making grants to farmers to pay for infrastructure, our grant program was funded philanthropically because we are well, we're not a 501c3, but we are a public instrumentality of the state, but we are an eligible entity, and then we are able to re-grant. So it just depends on the structure. I think it's really exciting that we live in a state where lots of funding for infrastructure and for projects and money to do important stuff can go to the businesses that are doing it. And I know that is challenging in places where we don't have as many of those opportunities.
Okay, we're getting some great questions, so keep them coming, everyone. Here's the next one. Do you see momentum for a payment for ecosystem services model that could support farmers to build healthy soil? Is there a role that philanthropy can play in advancing that work?
Yeah, there is work being done in that. There is a working group led by the Agency of Agriculture, and the governor and the legislature invested about $1 million in that working group to start getting closer to a pilot program to address that issue. So I think there is an opportunity there. The challenge is we always want something in Vermont that's authentic and real and measurable. So that is, I think, the challenge that they're having. But I think they've made tremendous progress over the last couple of years on developing that model. And there are a lot of bright minds that are working in that area. And over the next couple of years, I think you're going to see some progress being made in the value of protecting our environment and healthy soils. And there is a benefit outside just the farm itself. There's a benefit to society as well. So it may be another way for a farmer to be rewarded for their good practices.
Great. Have another one. Ooh, go ahead.
I'm really excited about that working group and the idea of payment for ecosystem services. I think it's really important, and valuing those externalities is something that can really move the needle on this stuff. I guess I'll also say that I don't think payment for ecosystem services is the tool that will make agriculture viable. I think there need to be a variety of tools and interventions. The market that farms exist in, whether they're teeny tiny little local folks or really big corporations, is extremely complex and competitive. And I think we'll still continue to have challenges with low margins. So for folks who are excited about payment for ecosystem services, like, keep putting your energy there, but also recognize like there's a larger systematic issue that will still be at play. Is my downer comment again, sorry.
Thanks, Liz. Next question is, what projects are in process to help make farming more profitable? Survivable, maybe, as a sole occupation? More, better for less?
Well, there's a lot of things we're working on, and it's always difficult sitting in my position. Farmers get a lot of advice from people that aren't farming. So there's so much on everyone's plate right now. There's, we've come through a pandemic. We're coming through some pretty significant issues related to costs of farming now. Particularly fuel is high, fertilizer is high if you use fertilizer. Labor is a big issue. So there's some big challenges. On the positive side, if you look at dairy, the price that they're being paid right now is at some of the highest levels that have been paid in a very, very long time for dairy and the conventional side, but that's being eaten away by some of the costs. We are looking at options, choices, giving people information. For example, the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center. Can you do something differently in your operation? Say you're a small farmer, maybe you're milking 50 cows. you may not want to make cheese, but maybe you could sell directly to a cheesemaker that needs more milk at a certain quality, and you get paid for a premium of that. There are a few models out there like that. Could there be more? Could you transition to something else on your farm? There's some energy around agritourism. This is not for everybody. Not everybody wants to have everyone over for a sleepover and then visit your calves in the morning. But there are opportunities there. I think we need to make some changes that allow more flexibility with some of our land use laws that allow more diversification. You know, people have called on us to embrace more diversification, and we are all for that if, you know, the numbers work out and things can work for the family structure. But sometimes we need to change the policy a little bit to allow that flexibility to happen. So you can have more burger nights. Maybe you can have, you know, something with processing on the operation. Maybe you can expand your visitors, et cetera. So those type of things are all important. But I'm encouraged about the innovation in dairy farmers and people that grow vegetables. People that are in the maple industry are always changing, adapting to what they have to do to make a successful business. No doubt, agriculture is a rugged business. It is, the margins, as Liz has mentioned, are very, very tight. But I think we're in a great position now in Vermont, where we're focused on quality, and we've got some bigger markets that are around us that we can really capitalize on if we are smart about our investments and making it more affordable for our farmers and our producers to make a living here.
Liz?
Yeah, agree with everything Anson has said. I do think the state is just really rich in support systems for helping folks become more profitable and supporting the innovation that farmers want to do. The program that I manage is one of our main purposes is looking at profitability, and the way that we do that is we fund about 15 to 20 full farm business advisors who are out there on farms, getting into the numbers, looking at the spreadsheets, measuring the things you can measure, working with farmers to look at that really detailed financial stuff and figuring out how can we do better? What are this farm's goals? How are we going to get there? So, we work really closely with a variety of organizations who do that work on the ground. Interrail Center, NOFA, UVM Extension, Land for Good, the Center for an Ag Economy. There's a network of folks that are really skilled on the business side of agriculture who can help with that. But just knowing your numbers and identifying how to be more profitable is not everything. And I think all that Anson said about innovation and new markets and diversification is really important, as are subsidies, payment for ecosystem services, all that stuff.
Thanks, Liz. So you both are funders as well as being service providers. Both the state and the HCB provide lots of funding, grants particularly, into the food and farming ecosystem. What should other funders be thinking about in terms of gaps? For example, funding for climate smart ag and forestry, energy efficiency, et cetera?
Yes, I think there's gaps everywhere. One really obvious one is that most folks who are making grants require a match, and it can be really challenging to get that match. So that's where I think there's room on almost anything to be partnering with existing funders to help make projects happen, because sometimes a farm or a project just doesn't have that kind of match lying around. So I think we need more of everything. I'm not sure I would single one thing out, but would love to hear what Anson is thinking.
Yeah, I think, I'll give an example of a success story. And this was a meaningful project that a funder came forward, and it evolves around a a barn painting project that involves both the state of Vermont, but also involves a funder. The funder came to us and wanted to make sure that these working barns got spruced up. So, and I'll give you an example. Last year, we had an event where we celebrated the fact that we had some youth that got some lifelong skills about painting a barn, earning a paycheck, learning those skills. The farm family, did not have the resources in this economy to give that beautiful classic barn a paint job to get it painted. So the funder steps forward, buys the paint, does the materials. And it was a very moving experience because, it didn't take a lot of resources, but it was really meaningful that this barn got done. And the mother, who was getting along in age, didn't ever think in her lifetime that she would see her beautiful barn being painted again and looking out of the great vista of Caledonia County. So those investments that maybe we can't do as a state government, where a funder can step in and help and fill those gaps, are really valuable. It could be $5,000, it could be $10,000, it could be $50,000. Those can spread. So now we're trying to do more barns this year. So we have goals and set goals to do that. So the kids are getting some skills. The farm families, it's getting more affordable. That barn's going to be in production longer. It's going to look beautiful. Our visitors are going to love it. And it's just one of those sort of success stories that works when people step in and fill in those gaps.
Yeah, and I guess I'll add that I think like those issue areas that came up in the question, like climate, work, and energy efficiency, like issue areas are really important places to invest, but so are just the organizations doing a variety of work that VCF is already supporting with fund holder support. Those organizations are often tackling so many of these interconnected issues, and they need that ongoing multi-year funding to be able to do the good work that's already happening. And some of our more emerging organizations in this space, like the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, like Vermont Relief Collaborative, like they also really need our ongoing support and are working on those same interconnected issues. So I think if you're not able to invest directly in farmers or projects in that way, investing directly in both the grassroots and more established organizations is just as important as picking specific issue areas.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate what Liz said. The VCF does support a lot of nonprofits that are working with farmers and in the agriculture sector. So if you aren't directly seeing a way to give to a farmer, you can help VCF support nonprofits that is supporting the entire sector. So we have time for one more question. And this one is 20 years from now, what does farm and food production look like in Vermont and or the US? And what should it look like from your perspective? Who wants to go first?
I'll tackle it. So it's going to be different. So we know that. We know there's a transition going on now with what's going on in the world. My hope is that it'll be profitable for our farmers, that we will find a way to make sure that they're paid adequately for what they do to, make our land and agriculture production and make it viable. So we hope that's the case. And we hope we're going to produce more food for our neighbors in the region. Figure out a system where we don't have to transport it from California all the time to get something in our supermarkets. We're challenged in a little bit in Vermont, our climate challenges, because we're winter a lot of the year. So those fresh vegetables and all that stuff. So we need to work on storage. We need to work on capacity to process. We need to work on transportation. And of course, we need to make sure we have enough workers to do this. And we also need to really work over the next few years on the transition, as we talked about early on in our forum, about making sure that we have a transition in place where young people are allowed to take over the farm and people can retire as well.
Thank you, Anson.
I think that's a beautiful vision, Anson, and I definitely have a lot more feelings on what it should look like than what it will look like. Yeah, I mean, I really like the work that I feel like we're here to do is to build that more resilient, localized food system that can support neighbors, can support farmers, can support farm workers, where we have a really diverse agricultural system that takes care of people and takes care of the land. I think it's possible. I think it's extremely feasible. I think one thing that the challenge of the pandemic showed us is that while cheap food on a national level is resilient in some ways because we need food that people can afford, local food systems are also incredibly resilient in that they're not disrupted by things like pandemics. So I think we really need to tackle those dual issues of Vermont being a place that can produce an incredibly important basic need for all of its residents, food, and making sure that Vermonters can afford that and that farmers and farm workers have a dignified place to live.
Thanks, Liz. Well, we are out of time. We wish we had gotten to all the questions. Thank you so much for the attendees for submitting your questions. Thank you everyone for a great conversation. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Anson, for taking the time to share your thoughts and ideas. Please stay tuned for a recording of this discussion at vermontcf.org and watch for other events, briefs, articles, and videos at the Vermont Community Foundation's Insight Hub. Please take a moment to fill out your surveys that appear when you log off this webinar. It helps us plan future events. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you all.